family with a grandfather who was an artist, a stage designer. My father was the same. My brother was a brilliant artist, and I really felt overwhelmed by the talent around me. Didn't think that I could ever be as good as any of them. My father suggested I should go and join a photographic studio, what was called a commercial studio up in London, where they did advertising photographs, and we photographed people ladies in fur coats and ladies knitting patterns and things like that. Very dull and very boring. And then I started a studio on my own, which was quite frightening but fun. I learnt a lot about making compositions and looking at things. So in a way it wasn't a waste of time, but eventually I didn't want to do it anymore. And I started to think about illustration, which is what I'd always wanted to do. And one of the first things I did was I was going to make a poster of mice making the alphabet, and I was going to sell it at the craft fairs when I sold my pottery. But in the end I turned it into this, and I started to look for publishers. You just had to go around. You have to go around asking people to look at your work. So that was the first thing. Monday's child is fair of face, and Tuesday's child is full of grace. It's a little mouse with her bottom in the air, very ungainly, putting her shoes on, and then she glides onto the stage. That's one of the first ideas for Angelina, from my point of view. When the Angelina stories were first written, the first Angelina Ballerina book, she wasn't called Angelina, she was called Primrose, and the character was a little girl. I made her a mouse, and everybody liked it, so we went ahead and did it as mice. I was really happy to have this story to illustrate by Catherine Hollibird, and we've gone on to do nearly 14 stories, and of course we've become extremely good friends while we've been doing it. So after these little concertinas and these little learning books, I did an Angelina book, which was the first full colour picture book that I'd ever done, and that gave me the courage to start to think I could perhaps earn a living by it. And then I started working for other publishers as well, and that was the beginning of it. This is the story for Angelina and Henry, and you can see where I've been chopping up the text and making a little note for myself. And I've just indicated the type is going to go there and there's going to be a big picture there. So that's dividing up the story. And then I start doing my first very rough scribbles. There's Angelina pirouetting and her uncle saying, we're going to go camping, and she's so excited. I decided to change this, and I made that picture go right across with a little bit of type. And then this picture was slightly smaller, and the type came over. So you see, you do a rough idea and then you change it. Having done the first rough storyboard, now I'm going to do it a bit more carefully, and there will be another rough after this, because this is working it out a little bit more carefully, and then I will enlarge it on the photocopier to fit the book. This double page changed in the end, and I made it go right across the whole book. It's a full double page picture with the type fitted in the space here. By doing these roughs, it enables you to make changes. If you started straight into drawing the book and then halfway through you made a mistake, it would be very difficult. Having done the storyboards and the roughs and got a feeling for it, I then decided that I must get their costumes right before I go any further. And then I worked out Angelina's waistcoat and her rucksack and how she would carry her sleeping roll and things like that. And then I can refer back to that while I'm doing the book. This is so that I don't get it wrong halfway through the book and give, I say, yellow pockets instead of red ones. You've got to remember, get it right. I will do a rough very quickly to get the feeling. And then you put some thin paper over, you see it, and you take what you want and draw it more carefully. But I have to do these roughs before I can get through to these more final ones. I can't get straight to it that way. I can't get straight to the final ones without doing a rough first. People People often ask me why I draw mice, and it's very odd because once you start doing something you get stuck with it, but I'm never quite sure why. I do like them because they have little hands like humans that can hold objects. They can go up on their hind legs, which is slightly human. Then they have the added extra of whiskers and tails, which help you show their emotions. Because when Angelina's sad, her whiskers droop, and when she's happy, they go up in the air. Little things like that. But there's also another thing. My father used to call my mother Mouse. In fact, when I was very little, I thought that Mouse was the name for mothers. Didn't realise it was just her name. And I think it was because she always had to have a little bit of cheese at the end of every meal. So I started drawing mice and had a little bit of success with them. And so I rather got stuck with them. But, of course, I draw other things as well. I draw humans and pigs and bears. So you don't have to be stuck with mice, but I do seem to do an awful lot of them. Although I enjoy and love illustrating other people's work because they have ideas which I can't possibly have, I do also like to do my own, but I find it really quite difficult. So I decided to do an A-level English course because I'd never done it at school. So I went and did an adult education, 2 years. And it really was a great help. And then I wrote 10 stories, I think it was, and illustrated them, which was very satisfying. The whole point of these books was that I needed to draw very bold, and I'm not used to doing that. And I used a technique involving photocopier. I do a very, very tiny drawing. Then, having done that, there's a lot of roughs that get me to this point. Then I do one blow up, then another one, and then another one, so that's 3. And then the final one. What I've done here is another technique, but you have to practice. You put this funny stuff on called masking fluid. Now, can you imagine if I was trying to go through all the little spaces between the clouds? I just couldn't do it and get it all even. I mean, I've tried on other pictures and I've made such a mess. I make a quick print on my computer and then I stick them together. They haven't got the words yet. By the time the type goes there, which will be heavy and black, you want to see what's happening with these flowers. By doing this, I can go through the whole book, see if it's working. I don't like to do any book where I don't have some sort of say in the relationship of the picture to the words, because I think it's so terribly important. What usually happens is that the author does the story, then the publisher takes it on, the designer takes it on, and usually a designer will give a layout to the artist, but I prefer to lay it out myself if I can. It's one big picture of the table and it's their journey around the table, and the idea is that the type, the words it's very important where the words are placed, so that you read the words and take your journey around the table. The words lead you through. I think text is a lovely thing to look at as well as the pictures. Therefore I like to see it. It isn't just there to tell the story, it's there to look as good as the pictures. It balances the pictures. I had written the idea that Charlie gets stuck up in the springs of the sofa. How was I going to draw it? This was the first idea, and that was drawn from my imagination. And it looks wrong. It doesn't work. So my father was terribly sweet. He came back one day because he knew I had this problem with a spring he got from the local sofa maker. So what I did was I did a very careful drawing of the spring. And then what I did was I photocopied that 4 times on tracing paper and cut each piece out and laid them and stuck them together. Having done that, I then laid my thin paper over it so that I could draw from it and put the springs on there. pictures I love doing is, for instance, where one thing changes into another. And in Alexander and the Magic Boat, where Alexander takes his mother off for an imaginary voyage, he makes a boat out of the chairs, and his imagination makes the sea and the carpet begin to mingle. So in other words, the reality is changing into the imaginary. This is the last cottage I lived in, and it has stone walls, which is what I did for Angelina's cottage. The interior and the atmosphere of Angelina's cottage is like the one that I lived in as a child. We had no running water except the water we pumped from the pond, and I believe a newt came through the tap once. But I don't know if that's a sort of silly story. But anyway, my brother and I had to collect drinking water because there was no drinking water on tap from a tap down at the end of the lane. We had no electricity, so we had candles that lighted us to bed. We had paraffin lamps in the evening. When I first decided the setting for Angelina, I didn't think twice. I simply put it where I was as a child, in this cottage without the electricity. When it was first suggested that we made a pop-up, this was the dummy that the paper engineer brought along to show me how the stage would work. So this is how it starts off, and you wonder how ever it could end up being like that. All these bits come apart, and you have to draw them and colour them all separately on sheets of paper. So you hope you're going to get everything matching right. It's really quite a very complicated thing to do. See, some things changed. That came lower, that disappeared, that changed so that we could see more of the background. All these roughs and dummies are terribly important so that you can make alterations. This was the theatre bit, and then that is the backstage there. There's a turntable there for posters, ballet posters, and on the other side, that same wheel, change your costumes up in the costume part. All these things had to be painted flat, and it was very difficult to know which was on the top and which was underneath. And everything has to fit when it's all printed. It's even painted underneath the table as well, because, you know, when I was a child, if I had a book like this, I would have looked at the backs of things, and if they weren't painted, I was very cross. I think once you've done a pop-up, you are so exhausted by the end. It really is a lot of work, but great fun. When it was suggested that Angelina should have a doll made of her, I made a sample one. At my village school, I'd learnt to make toys. It was one of our activities, and so I made this doll. She looks a bit funny, but I'm very fond of her. I thought it really important to have moving legs. So this was a little bit more carefully done, again with moving legs and some wire in the tail. So that was number 2 in a prettier dress. So the company took my design and worked with it. Here's the doll they made. And they insisted she had to have knickers. This is an even later version, which her shoes come off, I think. Here's another one, which is a bendy one. So every company makes a different Angelina. And then another company made something else here, which is rather nice. Here's Angelina, and there's me, 10 years old, I think. I went up a couple of times and looked over the first samples with the girl who made them, and made some suggestions, because I've done sculpture before now, so we were pretty able to talk to each other about it. And she took on board what I said, and I think she made a very, very good job of them. When Catherine and I heard that Angelina might be made into a ballet, we were absolutely delighted. We'd been longing for this, and it's taken a long time when you consider it's 25 years now since I started Angelina. I started Angelina in 1983. And we're absolutely delighted too with the way the English National Ballet have produced it. They've stayed very close to the costumes and the characters of the mice, even though they're humans dancing them, and the settings and everything. It's absolutely lovely. Couldn't be better.
This is Emily, and she loves your illustrations. They're amazing. We've got all of your books. Have you? Yes.
People sometimes ask me how you make a successful series. And you don't make it, it just happens. And you're lucky if it happens. But to consciously do it is very difficult. I'm about to do the 15th, so it amazes us. My mother always said I didn't have any patience when I was little. If she could see me now,